This is Criteria. Alrighty, hi there everyone. Welcome back to Criteria, the Catholic Film Podcast. I'm James Majewski here with my co-host Thomas V. Miras. How's it going, Thomas?
Good, James. How are you?
I am doing well. And for those who are watching, it'll be apparent that you, again, are calling in remotely. But those who are only listening, perhaps just a word that you are still on your journey to Italy, as it were.
Yeah.
And so, yes, with that, I am alluding to the film that we are covering today, not Journey to Italy, but a Rossellini film, Paisan. We've done two other Roberto Rossellini films before that were on the Vatican film list, Rome Open City, and then his later Flowers of St. Francis. But really, we wanted to do this not only to set us up for doing more Rossellini down the line. This is a director, a filmmaker who we want to feature a lot more of on the podcast, but also because, by gum, we got to get an Italian film in there while you're in Italy.
Right.
So, Thomas, do you want to say any further words about this film?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so I'm in Rome, and I'm about to leave Rome and head north, so it sort of mirrors the trajectory, not literally, but sort of in a general way of the story of this film. Paisan, the English title, Paisa, the Italian title, with an accent on the last A. Came out in 1946. This is the film that followed Rome Open City. Those two films plus the film after them, Deutschland Year Zero, are grouped together as like Rossellini's war trilogy. Although I didn't really like Deutschland Year Zero the one time I watched it, but this film, I think, is very interesting. The title is a corruption of the Italian-American word paesano, meaning like countryman or buddy, and it was commonly used by American soldiers to sort of signal friendliness towards the Italian population when they came into Italy. The film consists of 6 vignettes following the American troops liberating Italy from the south to the north. So we've got Sicily, Naples, Rome, Florence, the Romagna region, and the Po Delta. And this film was conceived by Rossellini together with American soldiers in Italy, including Rod Geiger, who had helped to fund the production of Rome Open City, and Klaus Mann, son of the novelist Thomas Mann, who was the most important of the film's several screenwriters, although I don't think he's actually credited in the film. This film was originally conceived as being from the American perspective. And I'll quote the excellent Rossellini biographer Tag Gallagher here. 7 from the U.S., which was the original title, was to be a film for Americans, addressed to Americans, and about Americans discovering Italy. And then Rossellini switched it to the Italian perspective, with the American characters being kind of naive foreigners, not really understanding what they're getting into for a lot of the film. Sergio Amadei, who had worked on Rome Open City and exerted and kind of an ideological influence on the politics of that film. I remember when we discussed that film that we liked it, but you in particular dinged it a bit for just being a little bit too ideological, messagey. I mean, being made like before the war had even really ended, and sort of contrived in a certain way. And I think that actually Rossellini shared your perspective. So Sergio Amadei worked on Rome Open City, and he was one of the co-writers of this film, but Rossellini managed to kind of shake him off at some point in the course of the project, making this, in view of Rossellini's biographer Tag Gallagher, the first movie in which Rossellini's visions completely dominates. Another of the co-writers who had also worked on Rome Open City is the future director Federico Fellini. And so Rossellini, perhaps echoing your view of Rome Open City, James, he said that he hated Rome Open City and loved Paisa because the latter was purer and less seductive. It's raw, but somehow very effective. I just find it a really fascinating and I don't know that I've seen another film like this. Even The Flowers of St. Francis, with its vignettes, is kind of different because all these vignettes are all about different characters. They're all different stories. And they are this just sort of snapshot into into Italy. It feels like a very like national film in a way, because it goes all the way from, Sicily to the very, very north of Italy. Anyway, I'll let you jump in, but that's sort of a general introduction to the origins of the film.
Yes. Well, when we talked about Rome Open City, we talked about the sort of liability of discussing a historical subject so proximate to the thing itself, right? So Rome Open City was 1945. Of course, the war was basically just coming to an end. Paisan is 1946. And so the war may be over, but it's still very, very, very fresh. I mean, this is like, recent memory. And so I think that there are some challenges to the kind of perspective that you're able to adopt in dealing with a subject so close in time. And there are some challenges, but there are also probably some advantages. I mean, for one, you mentioned these locations. Not only are the locations amazing, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on, but they're also still war torn. There's still a lot of opportunity for featuring, like real war devastation. And then also the people who are featured. So you mentioned that there's a mixture of actors and non-professionals. But for all of these non-professionals, these are, Italian men and women, children who, in fact, lived through these very things. And so there's a kind of authenticity and even like documentary-like quality to the film. In fact, I wonder, as I was watching it, I was wondering if there weren't moments where Rossellini cuts in actual documentary footage from the war, specifically in these transitional interludes between vignettes when there's descriptions about the advance of the Allies through Italy and what's
I think
happening.
Certainly at the very beginning, the footage that he uses of Allied ships and such, I think that's definitely, you can tell that it's sort of newsreel footage type stuff.
Right. But my sense is that this reappears throughout the film, and it does go a long way to lending the whole thing this kind of feel of reality. So there are pros and there are cons. I will say that the cons, I think, are largely avoided here. I mean, you could probably, debate that. But whereas in Rome Open City, like you already mentioned, there was a very apparent kind of prejudice on the story. Here, I would say that if it's not necessarily taking a, quote unquote, like more objective perspective, it is a more like human. Well, I would describe this film, if I were to sort of say, like, what connects all these vignettes? What is this movie about? I would say that it's a look at the personal cost, the human cost of war. Obviously, war is this tragic and terrible thing. And so the violence, the destruction is very apparent. But when you think about the fraying of the social fabric, of the moral devastation, of the many, many, many personal defeats and losses, sort of localized defeats, even, within the context of a broader military victory. That's sort of what this film is looking at from my perspective.
Sure.
And so I kind of see it as another step almost in the sort of working out in the popular consciousness and the popular imagination, like processing this still very recent trauma and trying to understand what it is that just happened to us as a nation, as a people, but also it's concerned with, the other peoples that were swept up in this. So even though it is from the Italian perspective, it does very prominently feature American soldiers and the interactions with Americans and how meaningful that relationship is and was. And so I think that it's a very, I also think that this is a film unlike anything quite that I've seen. And it's because it's a war movie, it's definitely a World War II movie, but it's so much concerned about sort of, it's almost as if the war is happening in the background, and what we're really concerned about are the sort of personal stories, the very human struggles and moments and relationships. And it's very, very, all of that is very beautifully set up with the very first vignette. So maybe we can just sort of like, we don't have to go through and talk about each vignette equally or something, but, I think it would be good to begin talking about the first vignette, unless there are any more like introductory preface remarks you want to make.
I'll just make a general statement about these vignettes. We kind of get a little bit of everything in terms of different kinds of drama, but also in terms of like the stage in which each of these places are vis-a-vis the progress of the war, because the first vignette in Sicily is the first landing of Americans in Sicily. And so the Germans are still there, back there. Maybe they're pulling back a bit, but they're still there. They're still a threat. Some places we've got Naples is completely liberated in the Naples segment, so it's all aftermath at that point. Rome, likewise. And then we've got other situations further north where the things are still progressing. There's still territory that is embattled. And interestingly, because it goes from south to north, the last vignette is a place where it feels like the war proper hasn't even quite reached it yet. It's like the strength is on the German side in the last vignette, unlike in some of these others where the Germans have already been repelled or perhaps already fled. And so it's interesting that it ends with, there's a tragic character to many, probably most of these vignettes. We're left with a sense, like you said, of the cost of the sacrifice. It's interesting that he chooses to conclude on that. But anyway, yes, let's go to the first one, because that the first one also is very, very focused on that as well, I think.
Yeah. So the first one is awesome because I think it really does establish this idea of the war in the background and the people really in the foreground. And I would include the German soldiers in this as well. So like you mentioned, the first vignette sees the Allies landing for the first time in Italy. And so there's a lot of confusion. At first, the Americans don't really know where they're going. They're kind of, there's this sort of bewilderment on their part. Then with the local Italians, they mistake the Americans at first for German soldiers, and they have to kind of figure out, oh, wait, these are Americans. And then even the Germans themselves, the Germans apparently have already started to pull back, kind of in anticipation, perhaps, of this Allied assault. But one even gets the sense from the Germans that they're not totally sure if the Americans have landed yet or where they are. And so most of this vignette features around this sort of, I don't know, what is it? It's kind of like almost like an abandoned castle-like structure. I can't remember if they mention exactly what this
some kind of fortress on the coast.
Yeah, so it's sort of like away from the populated center. It's kind of abandoned, but we get the American soldiers moving into it and then exploring the surrounding area. We get the German soldiers also coming into it and not really knowing that the Americans are there. And sort of at the center of all of this are a couple, a young American soldier, Joe, and then Carmela, who is the Italian local who has led them to this place. Yes. And so, it's just kind of this strange picture of war, because we don't see big battles, we don't see clear enemy lines. We just have this almost like liminal space with these different characters moving in and out of it. And so to me, it really highlights this human, personal quality and concern that the film has with the war as kind of this backdrop you know?
It's funny that you say liminal space. That made me think of the fact that the reason the girl has to guide them is because they have to sort of like find this safe space to walk over what the Italians call the lava, which is like, to be clear, it's not hot molten lava. It's like solidified lava trail that they're going on. But I mean, lava is this thing that like you think of lava that's cooled. It's like
Yeah.
almost the ambiguous situation that the Americans are entering into there, you could say.
Yeah.
you know.
Well, and also, this is it's the first vignette that also establishes a interest in location. So we get our first really awesome on location, scenario, because they're right there on the coast. So the waves and the surf are kind of a character in themselves. And I think, also contributes to this liminal quality, this boundary, and this sort of unknown twilight zone that all of these characters are in. But fundamentally, the first vignette, I see it as a Romeo and Juliet tale, because even though there's no explicit romance that develops between these two characters, Joe basically has to stay behind and watch Carmela while the other American soldiers go and sort of reconnaissance the area. But in their sort of grasping attempts to communicate with each other, we see a really touching picture of human relationship, and reaching across boundaries and cultures, and this kind of amazing meeting between these two people under really extraordinary circumstances, that like a real warmth comes through eventually. And we're left thinking that there could be the possibility for something beautiful to come of this meeting, but it's cut tragically short, and it's cut short for both of them. And so there is this sense of them being kind of star-crossed lovers, who are caught
Literally, because there's a shooting star featured in this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. So, I booted up this film not knowing what to expect. Everything that I've seen by Rossellini, I've liked, but, I'm much more, like, for instance, I love Journey to Italy, but was a little, cooler on Rome Open City. And so with this sort of being earlier towards his career, I wasn't sure what I would think of it. You also get kind of tired of seeing so many World War II movies, but very quickly I was locked in. It almost surprised me because I was coming in with not necessarily the best attitude, but I mean, as soon as that like squad leaves and Joe and Carmela are left together, it was like it was undeniable. I was just immediately pulled in, and had this very strong sense of oh, this is different. Something else is happening right now. So it's an awesome opening vignette.
First time I saw the film, my overall I was just like, wow, this was just such. It felt so fresh. It felt so unique. Partially because of this sort of short story format, but even amid like in that first vignette, some of the American soldiers like there's dialogue or there's acting occasionally that feels a little clunky with some of the English speaking characters in the film. And yet it still somehow works. Like every single time, every single vignette, like it has a point where like the emotion kind of, and at least in my case, kind of like snuck up on me. Like all of it, there's all of this, there's stuff that's kind of raw, rough around the edges surrounding it often. But then suddenly you get to this moment of truth that is like very touching, and I find that happening consistently throughout the entire film.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. That's well observed. One other thing that I really like about this vignette is, and I think that this is almost accidental, but the sound of it, I already mentioned, the sound of the surf and the waves, but because so much of it takes place inside of this fort, that's, made of stone, it's kind of cavernous, there are these tight spaces, you get this, very natural reverb coming through in the recordings of the actors, speaking their lines to each other. And so I just found myself hearing that and really feeling like I was being put in the place. There was actually a moment when I just closed my eyes and just listened to the lines and just was sort of aware of the fact that I was listening to an audio recording of, 80 years ago.
Probably on the spot, right? Like,
Right. And that I was hearing, not just the voices of these people, but I was also hearing something of the space itself, and it like I said, I think that this is, I don't know if this is intentional. I think it's probably more than anything just having to do with the limitations of the technology at the time, but it's still worth pointing out, I think, because it's this documentary like quality that I think is present throughout in different ways and really kind of takes you back to the historical event that this film is trying to represent.
Yeah. And, speaking of documentary quality, the first time that really hit for me was at the beginning of the Naples sequence, because that's a situation where definitely, in the Sicily sequence, all the elements are, all the characters, so to speak, are under the control of the director. But in the Naples, you're in Naples and there's stuff happening. I'm sure that's like not all coordinated by Rossellini. There's docks being unloaded. There's all sorts of different stuff going on. People are running in the streets, And so then you're like, oh, okay, this is really,
Yeah. So let's talk about that Naples sequence, because that's the second vignette that you're alluding to, right?
So this one features the duo of a little Neapolitan boy. He's an orphan, and he's just running game in the city with his little friends, doing acrobatics to get money and stealing people's shoes, stealing the shoes and jackets of drunk American, GIs and stuff. And then this black American soldier who's there as well, and who's drunk for much of the, he's drunk when we're introduced to him. He's drunk for much of the vignette. And sort of just this boy attaches himself to this guy, or vice versa.
Yes. Yeah. So this character, the little boy, he's very much like a Gavroche, like Les Miserables type character.
And he's awesome. He's like the most fun to watch, I think, of any of the characters in the film.
Yeah. He's great. And then, he strikes up this kind of unlikely pairing with this American soldier who, again, is drunk when we first meet him. And so there's this amazing image of him being led by this little boy. He's like stumbling drunk, through the streets of Naples, and this little boy is leading him. There's just something so surreal about this picture. That I just sort of found delightful in itself. But then, they have a very kind of touching relationship again, and there's a nice moment when, is this character's name Joe as well? I think this is another Joe.
I think no. You know what? In this case, they just call him Joe. They just call all American soldiers Joe.
Oh, I see.
In the first one, his name is actually Joe. In the second one, they're just calling all the soldiers Joe.
I see.
Yeah.
G.I. Joe.
Yeah.
But there's a nice moment when he sings, a very
nobody knows the troubles I've seen.
Yeah. And so there's just something about this sequence that, even though it's telling a definite story, it feels a little more image based and a little more poetic, and so it's sort of working on that level. The vignette ends with sort of much time passes, and we see this soldier again, sobered up, doing his job. He's a military police, as it happens.
The boy had warned him before, don't fall asleep or I'll steal your shoes. And then he warns him, and then he falls asleep and he steals his shoes.
Yeah, when we cut to this later, move forward in time, he's apprehending this boy, not realizing who he is at first, for stealing. And then recognition dawns upon him. You're the guy who stole my shoes. So he takes him back to where he lives. He wants to speak to his mother and father. And this is when he discovers that the boy actually his mother and father have died in the war.
And he lives in this like cave colony with displaced Italians. And at that point, the soldier's reaction is literally to run away.
Yes.
Because he's like confronted with this, like, I mean, there's this subtext of him like being this black American soldier, and he's got this perspective of like, I'm an outsider, I'm black, you know, and there's even this great scene where he goes into like, he's still drunk, he goes into like a puppet show, like a play, and it's like some, you know, historical tale of like battling against the Moors, and like that provokes him to like jump on the stage and start fighting like the white soldier. But anyway,
oh, so funny.
Then he ends up in these caves and he sees like, oh, this is what it's like here, and he just runs away. Yeah.
But you know, I also kind of found myself thinking about this experience of abandonment from or this sort of ambivalent relationship with your liberators. So, you know, like, even though it's not sort of made explicit, there is kind of like a fatherly relationship that emerges between Joe and this young Neapolitan boy. And, you know, this final gesture of him driving him back to where he lives, you know, and wanting to speak to his parents. I mean, it's a gesture really of fatherly concern, of correcting behavior, you know, of discipline. And it's almost like when faced with the magnitude of the of the loss, you know, of the void in this boy's life and the impossibility of filling it, the only thing he can do is leave. And it just made me think, you know, sort of zooming out about this relationship of a liberating army to a people that has been you know, ravaged by war. You know, the Liberation Army can't stick around forever. Not that in this analogy, like America is daddy, but what I mean is just that like the disruption of the social fabric, you know, and the impossibility of filling what has been taken away. You know, this is sort of what I'm talking about seeing this film as looking at the human devastation, the human cost, the moral wreckage that's left over from war.
Yeah, for sure. So the third,
I mean, talking about moral devastation, that's in the third episode, it's the most apparent.
Yeah. So the third episode is from the perspective of this young woman who's become a prostitute 6 months into the American occupation of Rome. And she is, you know, another drunk American soldier that she leads by the hand to get to her place, and they start having a conversation, and he, you know, talks about how you women, Italian or women, are all the same, and it was different when we first came in. It felt, you know, joyful and everything, and that it's her realization, like, oh, I've met this guy before, and we get a flashback from his perspective, from both their perspective, of their meeting when he first comes out and stumbles out of his tank when the Americans arrive, and how joyful she is, and how they form this connection and are hoping to meet again, and he never went and tried to find her. But we've got this very different situation now where it's brutal. He's very dismissive of, you know, all of these women who he once sort of like felt drawn to, or felt welcomed by in a wholesome way, you know, when he first came in. And there's this opportunity for potential redemption on her part, and he completely dismisses it.
Right. Yeah. You know, it's to me, it's really a study of, you know, like what happens when the soldiers stop fighting the war and they have to stick around. And so you've brought all these young men who are now kind of just in your city in Rome. And what are they doing? They're drinking and they're womanizing, and and so the young women in Rome sort of are also changed by this experience. And so we see a picture at the beginning, actually, how we're introduced to this character. She gets into a fight with another woman in one of these nightclubs, and both of them are being hauled away by the military police to be put into, a truck and taken, ostensibly to like a jail cell or something like that. The truck is filled with young women. I don't know what sort of how much this is rooted in historical fact, but the picture is, again, it's very startling because you don't see a truck full of like antisocial, violent men. You see a truck full of dolled up women, and
prostitution.
And so
bust,
yeah. So she has. Look, I mean, I will say that obviously she's a prostitute, but it isn't made. It's not made evident to us that is what's going on. From the two people that are being pulled out of this
at the very beginning, you mean?
By the police are the two people who got into a fight, and so I don't know. I don't know that it's a prostitution bust, or to me it read more as just dealing with drunk rabble rousers, but in any case, she definitely is a prostitute because she just encounters this guy on the street, brings him back, despite his initial protestations, actually, but it's because he's so inebriated that he can't even really put up much resistance. And she takes him not to her home, but to a kind of place where she has an arrangement with someone, to make use of a room. Okay. So, but when we see in the flashback, these two characters, one kind of puffed up with, pride at having, been a part of a liberating force and a soldier who's been working hard in his tank, and now can finally wash his face. And then, a woman who, together with the rest of Rome, is just over the moon happy at having been liberated. The last thing he does is gift her a bar of chocolate. This chocolate is a symbol of freedom and of a new lease on life. But how is that then spent? Well, we get like 6 months of essentially just of profligacy and of further and further degenerate behavior, so that now it seems like this almost like moral apocalypse, this like apocalyptic wasteland where someone like Francesca, the young woman, can just like reach and grab a drunk soldier off the street, so. And when she's talking to him, he doesn't back at the room. It's like he doesn't even have any interest in her, because he's so disillusioned, so disabused of the initial romance, and so the real tragedy is that he doesn't recognize her, and
And it's complicated because he's like, he's drunk and all that, but like, it's the whole situation. Like, in a way, you don't expect him to remember the encounter the next day. I don't think he like falls asleep. They don't even consummate it, and, right. But that's the real hard hitter. You get some hope because she leaves her real address with the woman to give to the soldier when he wakes up. And then the next morning you just see him, and, he's looking at this paper, and one of the other soldiers asks, like, what do you got there? And he's like, the address of a whore. And they both laugh, and he throws it away. And it's like, right. Brutal.
It is brutal, but I think it points to some kind of reality, right? Because she thinks that there might be a chance. There might be a chance at redemption here because he hasn't recognized her. So she's just going to leave. She's not going to do anything. Of course, she can't tell him who she is right there and then because that would just be to destroy his romantic ideal of her, you know? He tells her this story about the Francesca whom he met. She realizes who he is. She realizes that, you know, it's her that he's been looking for, but she can't tell him, hey, it's me, because of the circumstances that they're in. And so she wants to be able to basically keep him in the dark and reset, yes, but one cannot really. That there is there's a reality of an innocence that's been lost. Of course, I'm not saying that like redemption isn't possible for this woman, but that I think part of what Rossellini is concerned with in this vignette is this very real sense that an innocence has been lost, and this has to be. There's no easy reset button on this, you know? And so as tragic as it is that there's this missed connection, and just as a quick aside, you know, what a different world, you know, where you can't just get somebody's Instagram and be then essentially connected indefinitely for the rest of your life. You know, here, you know, there's a very real, just missed connection just by the simple practicalities, the logistics of being in a big city before, you know, the era of mass communication, social media. But like, yeah, I think really it's just that, you know, that this is going to be a longer process. You know, it's going to be a longer process of turning this ship around. It may have only taken 6 months, you know, to get here. But this is the consequence of, in part, of several years of, you know, extraordinary violence, and so now there's going to be a period of healing and of really having to confront some of the consequences of what this whole experience has meant for us, but also of our choices inside of that.
Yeah. So. The fourth vignette is in Florence, and this is about an English nurse who is trying to find Lupo, this sort of partisan anti-fascist resistance leader who it's implied that she had a relationship with. I don't really have much to say about the story personally, but this is a great example of the use of locations in the film. I don't know how many films have been shot in Florence, but I have to imagine that it's not easy to shoot a film in Florence, and there probably aren't a ton of films shot in Florence, you know,
right.
That aren't like documentaries or whatever. And so, like, to have this situation where there's like gunfire in the streets of Florence, and you're running through the Uffizi corridor, and like, you know, there's recognizable locations, and a lot of the film is literally them just navigating the space. You know, it's like a pretty thin on plot. And I just really, anybody who's been to Florence will enjoy it, and I'm sure even if you haven't been to Florence, but this is one of the most action packed, you know, in terms of, you know, physical action in the film. And it's, I just enjoy it in terms of his use of the space, basically.
Yes. Well, and also the fact of its being in Florence is very important because there's a lot of reference to the Arno River that flows through, that kind of bifurcates Florence, right? So you have one side of the city and then the other side. And so the Germans have been pushed out of one side of the city, but they are very much still on the other side. And so, you know, this episode really is, yeah, like you said, it's this odyssey of her journey together with, she links up with another character. His name's Massimo. He's a Florence local who's trying to trying to reunite with his wife and his son, who are still on the other side of German occupied Florence. And so together they're able to get to the other side of the Arno. You know, easier said than done because the Germans have blown up all of the bridges except for one. And, you know, but it's a sort of portrait of occupied Italy.
Yeah, I will mention if I'm not, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I believe that the people who are the threat in this are Italian fascists who are firing down from the towers and stuff. So
that's right.
We don't actually see the Germans, if I remember correctly. You're right that it is sort of ambiguously occupied by the Germans, but it's interesting that I think this is the one instance of the film where it's Italians versus Italians, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, and there's also actually mention that these fascists are shooting at people in the street, from the rooftops out of rage. That they're not even necessarily just targeting, soldiers, but shooting at women and civilians as well. So it's just to me, one of the things that's remarkable about this setting is the kind of juxtaposition of, liberated territory and not liberated territory, and how life continues, inside of this ongoing violence, and the sort of shifting borders of where is safe and where is not, and trying to navigate all of that. What we essentially see is this pair, the nurse and the Florence local, just trying to navigate and get through and find their way to. She's in search for this man, Lupo, and he's in search of his family. We don't see what happens to Massimo, if I'm not mistaken. So that thread is sort of left unresolved. But it is sort of a it's interesting because just narratively it doesn't go as many places as some of the other vignettes. It is sort of a little more flat, but that's why I think it's more interested in this sort of state of affairs.
It's extremely dynamic in terms of just them traveling through. It's captivating on that level. There's also just a great little thing where they're on the rooftop and they run into this like retired major who is just like excitedly watching and drawing up maps and trying to figure out who's where and following the course of the war from his roof. And he says, I was in what does he call it? He says, I was in the real war, like back in 1918 or something like that.
Crazy.
So that's just a fun.
But that's such a wonderful little interaction because it points to this like what I'm trying to describe here of how does one just exist? This is his home too. He's up on his roof, but how does one exist and navigate this sort of a circumstance in one's city, and so he's chosen a way of navigating that, perhaps different from most. Good. Okay. Well, so we're making good progress here. We've only got 2 more vignettes to discuss. This 5th one is really unlike any of the others.
Yeah, perhaps of most specific interest to our Catholic viewers. This one is set in the region of Romagna. I believe it's a Franciscan monastery near Rimini. And like the Flowers of St. Francis, I think these are real Franciscan, like conventual Franciscans, playing the characters and giving it this verisimilitude of monastic life. And the scenario, this is just such a fascinating segment, even just as a snapshot in time. Whatever you think, Rossellini may be saying with this or whatever, this snapshot of it's these 3 U.S. Army chaplains, a priest, like a Protestant pastor, and a Jew. And they are just asking to stay in this monastery. And this is after this area has already been liberated and safe and peaceful. And so they're going, out of historical interest, looking for respite and just a nice place to stay the night. And the monks, of course, are bound to hospitality, and they welcome them. And so it's really, there's like a culture clash in many of the the episodes, but this one in particular, it's like an American Catholic priest meeting, Italian monks, right? And so it's like a very particular kind of cultural encounter. And, it's just funny because with this American priest, you can sort of see like Vatican II just like roaring around the bend, like he's not bad or anything. It's just like their perspectives are different. And so you get this meeting of perspectives, and, it feels like very, very Rossellini in a way. What I've come having seen a number of his films, like where he, and people sort of like criticized him for this. He doesn't like sort of pick an ideological answer at the end. He sort of like transcends it in a way. And so you don't really sort of get him saying like who's right necessarily.
Right.
But it's like a wonderful, delightful, segment. But if there's like a conflict or a tension, it's basically that, the Franciscan monks discover that two of these chaplains are not Catholic. There's a Jew and the heretic, and you get this sort of like comical alarm of like the one monk running to tell all the others, and they're like, "Oh God, protect us," and then this real confrontation where one of the monks, maybe it's the abbot, I don't know, asks the American priest, like, have you ever talked to them? Have you ever tried to bring them to the true faith? Because like, you're in battle circumstances and could be, they could die at any time. So have you considered this? And him sort of like defending his perspective. And anyway, we can talk about how it sort of ends, but that's the basic setup.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's really not a whole lot more to it, because they join the friars for dinner. There's a rule of silence, and so no one is to speak. But this rule is broken when the American priest asks, why aren't you eating anything? Why are your plates empty? And the answer is that, well, we're fasting for essentially for the conversion of this Jewish rabbi and this Protestant minister. And so this prompts the American priest to get up and say, not some sort of rebuke or defense of his position, his position being essentially that, these are men of good faith, I haven't endeavored to try to convince them, but I'm not worried about them necessarily because they're good people. But he gets up and thanks the monks in this very beautiful way for, not just their hospitality, but for showing him that these qualities of humility, simplicity, of peace, that he had thought
and
lost
pure
in
faith,
the war.
pure faith. Yeah.
Yes. That he had thought were lost, abide, and I think that for me, hearing that, it's a very odd ending, right? Because we don't get a clear resolution to this central like tension, but to me, it sort of can be seen as of a piece with the thematic concerns of the film more broadly. Because it's sort of still asking this question of how do we recover what's been lost, or how do we move on from here? And I think that there is a kind of nod to the monastic life as being a safeguard of something in the way that it's served in the past, perhaps in the Dark Ages, and the role that monasteries, and that religious life more broadly has played for civilization in terms of like being the custodian of things. But then also I think that I don't know, I took it to be also just a comment about modernity in general. Now, I don't know if that's on Rossellini's mind, but it is on mine, and so I think that it's not just something lost during the war, but maybe something lost culturally, especially in America, more broadly. And so, you can kind of like interpret it how you will. Perhaps there's a
if there's a tilt in the direction of the American priest, it's that he ends his speech with "Pax hominibus bone voluntatis," peace to all men of goodwill, and so you could take that as him maybe making his point in a little very like subtle way, or whatever.
Right.
But
But you could also maybe read it as him being genuinely like shook by the commitment, by the concern of these friars for the salvation of their neighbor, to the extent that they will fast, they will forego eating. So I think that it cuts both ways, but it's a strange it's a strange sequence. It's really unlike anything else that we see in the film.
Yeah, it's quite fun. I've mentioned this book a few times, so I'll say the name: Tag Gallagher, The Adventures of Roberto Rossellini. I haven't read the whole thing. I've just been reading it, sort of like watching the films and then reading the relevant chapters and stuff. But it's awesome. He really writes. He really writes with his heart and really pays attention to the religious elements. He wrote a book about John Ford that takes a similar approach. It's an awesome book, but he mentions that some people criticize this sequence for not criticizing, seeming to sympathize with the monks and their quote unquote bigoted attitude, and people were saying, well, this is what caused the war in the first place, and this intolerance and stuff.
Lame.
Yeah, and so Tag Gallagher, he just talks about how again Rossellini wasn't gonna do that, and this is a theme in the book because Rossellini is a director. There aren't that many great Italian directors at this time. There's this emerging new movement in Italian film, and everybody wants a piece. And the Marxists are courting him, and the Catholic Church is courting him heavily, which we'll talk about more when we talk about some of the later films by him. Priests and religious actively collaborating with him on films, but also trying to instill in him this mission of being the Catholic neo-realist director. And so a theme in the Tag Gallagher biography is Rossellini just wriggling out, being able to use all of these different sides to get his films made, but sort of always wriggling out of getting put in any kind of box,
Wow. So interesting.
But yeah, so that, this is a fascinating sequence in terms of this meeting of different sort of approaches to the faith. And great fun to see the monks, in the enjoying the Americans bring canned food, and they're all sniffing it, and it's just there's a lot of fun little bits like that.
Yeah, but also I think that the film as a whole benefits from it because it draws us up into a consideration of these more transcendent themes, of salvation and religious truth, and so it kind of sets things up well for going into the final vignette, which actually for me is my personal favorite one of the six. And it's surprising to me actually because the reason it's my favorite is because of its setting. We've already talked about
super atmospheric. Yeah.
Yes. Oh my goodness. So can
you describe it? Try to describe it for the audience.
Okay, so the sixth episode takes place. This is the furthest up north, and we're in the Po Delta. And so the Po Delta, I guess
the Po is a river.
The Po is the longest river in Italy, apparently. But this area that we see in the film is, basically all marsh and almost swamplands, but not. There's no trees. It's long grass, reeds, and open water, and just very flat space. So it's a very aquatic landscape. It's a very alien landscape.
Quite desolate.
I can't. Yes, and desolate. And so I've used the word apocalyptic a few times, but I think that here, with no offense to Italy and to the Po Delta, but here this setting strikes me as being the most.
It feels like a place to go and die, honestly.
Yes, yeah. And it really feels the most like a wasteland and like a post-apocalypse,
and not because of war, not because of war damage, just because of the landscape.
Yes, and of inhospitality, right? I mean, to get around these soldiers, it's American OSS soldiers and local Italian resistance fighters, and they are essentially behind enemy lines. They're surrounded by Germans, and so they're low on supplies, they're low on food, they're low on ammo, so they're really just sort of on the ropes, just trying to survive. But to get around, they have to, use these rowboats and go in and out of the reeds, and they're hiding and they're not lighting fires. And it's just, it's very stark, and very almost like inhuman, because, they can't even traverse the landscape very easily. The first image that we see is of a
partisan.
Yes.
Yeah.
Partisan. So these are the resistance fighters.
Yes.
And so this one has been, ostensibly executed by the Germans and then set, on like a little raft down the river with a sign saying partisan on it, basically as an intimidation to the local people, and probably a demoralizing spectacle for other resistance fighters. But that image at the beginning of this body with the sign, floating down the water within this desolate landscape is just such a striking cinematic image, and so evocative of, yes, this wasteland.
If I can say something more about that. Were you going to say something more about that shot?
No, go ahead.
So this connects again to Catholic engagement with Rossellini's work. There's a French priest and film theorist, Amédée Eifret, and our friend Nathan has been looking into his work a lot and trying to get some of it translated. He talks about this shot, and he contrasts it with another shot about this film called Capo, which had a shot of a forward tracking shot towards a cadaver stuck on barbed wire. The camera sort of zooming, tracking at this cadaver. And Eifret called it the most perfect example of cinematic immorality. Death thereby becomes the object of pure curiosity and the means of propaganda. And he says, Rossellini too films a cadaver, but his camera stays silently and respectfully immobile, and it is death that, borne by the current, comes slowly closer to the camera lens. How can one not see that this single inversion is enough to change everything? It is no longer a matter of raping a cadaver, but the tragic reality of death which comes itself to pose to the living its ineluctable interrogations.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, but because what do we see then is the American soldiers together with the Italian fighters devising a really like elaborate distraction and rescue operation to retrieve this body and give it a proper burial. And so there is, this reverence for the dead, and this meditation on the corporal work of mercy of burying the dead. It's not insignificant. It's something that these men risk their lives to do, to be able to bury this man with their bare hands. They just sort of cover his body with dirt, because they don't have the tools to actually dig a hole. But it's done, as respectfully as it can be, and then they're off again on their way. I was going to say that this was my favorite sequence because it lives the most in my imagination and in my mind. I first saw this film several years ago.
Oh, I didn't. I thought this was your first time seeing it.
No. So this is the first time I've seen it in full. But I had only seen parts of it, including this final vignette, and this vignette has just like lived with me and haunted me for a long time. And every once in a while it just sort of comes back into my mind, and I just think about these shots and this. I can't imagine the logistics of shooting this the way that Rossellini does. We're out on the water, we're moving through the reeds, we're back up on land. And there's also some complicated action that happens with gunshots and explosions and nighttime sequences. Those nighttime sequences are awesome too because everything is pitch black. I mean, it's like he doesn't light these. It's very different, for instance, from the first vignette, which also takes place at night, but everything is very well lit. Here, they're looking around for a food and ammo drop, this airdrop that was supposed to come in the dead of night, and they can't find it, and we can barely even see the figures moving across the frame. So there's just something very haunting and very surreal about this setting and about the way that Rossellini chooses to shoot it. And I also appreciate its being the final sequence, for the bookending quality of these two liminal spaces that we've talked about. One being the coast where the Allies land, and then the other being this marshy, land and water hybrid, where the Allies are, surrounded. It doesn't end well for them. And so the last thing that we get is essentially the defeat of this group. And then I can't remember if it's voiceover or if it's
voiceover. So it says we've got a shot of just water that men have been dropped into, and the voiceover. It's very like quick. It's like very like mercilessly kind of like non-lingering. It just, and the voiceover comes in and it says, these events happened in the winter of 1944, and by the spring the war was over, and then it ends.
Right. And so what we get in this final vignette is essentially the picture of a defeat, of a total defeat of the good guys, but this defeat happens, just a few months before the victory of the war. And so, yes. Right. So yeah, it's just a very unsettling sequence, and together with the setting, it kind of gets under your skin, and like I said, it's sort of continued to live in my mind rent free, as they say. Since I first saw it, and I can't say that there are too many films that are like that.
It leaves you with the cost. It leaves you with the cost of the war and these guys who are going to be forgotten as individuals, because one of the guys says, my parents are never going to find out what happened. My family's never going to find out what happened to me. And that's actually, that line is said by a partisan. The dying partisan at the end of the Florence sequence as well. He says, tell my family so that what happened to me so they won't be worried, But, it's right after this, the most sort of cozy sequence, which is the Romagna sequence at the monastery. But he ends it with this, not with peace to men of goodwill, which might have been a kind of a schmaltzy thing to end the entire film with,
Right.
But, yeah.
This is probably my favorite World War II film.
Yeah?
Yeah, I'll probably go so far as to say that.
Wow. I know that it technically is a World War II film, but like, I just don't even put it in the same category. You know what I mean? But yeah, of course it is.
I think it has just enough action sequences to still be counted. I think you need to have like a few sequences of soldiers running around and shooting rifles. And then you still get to count yourself as a World War II movie.
Right. Yeah. So it's your favorite.
I think so. Like I said, coming into watching this, for this, you're right. This is the first time that I've watched it front to back. But part of that is because I just didn't I wasn't totally interested in going back and watching the whole thing, and partly because I sometimes feel a little indifferent to this uh, this subject in film. I've just seen so many war movies, and you get a certain at a certain point you start to feel like you've seen one, you've seen them all, and that is so not the case with this movie.
It's funny that you say that, because I have not seen a ton of World War II movies, and I recently went like on a big World War II movie kick. But again, it didn't even occur to me to like sort of group this in with the ones I was watching. I watched Band of Brothers for the first time. I watched Saving Private Ryan for the first time, and then I, went ahead and watched other movies about other wars because I was just sort of in this headspace a couple months ago. But yeah.
Well, I'll say that, if I were to point to a more modern, World War II movie that this most reminds me of, is I do think you can argue for a connection between Band of Brothers and this film. Because Band of Brothers, obviously Band of Brothers is different. It's a, television series. There's a lot going on.
There's a more consistent cast of characters, but it is geographical in that way too. And episodic, obviously, as a series.
Yes, and also very, very concerned about these human stories that crop up, So yeah, but it's I think it's all the more remarkable for having been made, just within a couple of years of the war's ending. And so I think it sort of I would have sooner included this film on the Vatican film list than Rome Open City, but I can understand why the Vatican did use Rome Open City instead.
Yeah. Forgot to mention the actress who plays the prostitute in the Rome sequence was in Rome Open City. She played the like evil lesbian Nazi woman.
I didn't even think about that.
Maria Miki. Yeah. So I'm sure we'll discuss at least, I would guess, 2 or 3 more Rossellini films. And we'll probably go in chronological order. So, this would, whether we do Journey to Italy or something in between, probably next we will end up with his collaboration with Ingrid Bergman next time we revisit Rossellini. And that's quite a rich collaboration as well. So, so we'll be moving past. Part of the point is we're moving out of his World War, his post-war sort of stage at that point. We're in the early 50s, So anyway, well, I'm glad we discussed this while I was here in Rome, and I was only in Florence, a couple months ago, and so. And I'm going there in 2 days. So,
yeah, and I was recognizing all sorts of locations.
Right. Yeah, that's fun. I will be taking a couple weeks of vacation, and I will be back, and we will have an interview right when I get back with the director of Triumph of the Heart, the wonderful movie about St. Maximilian Kolbe that we had just reviewed a couple episodes ago. And then hopefully, if Nathan's available before the end of the year, we can get to A Hidden Life, conclude our Terrence Malick series, aside from whatever future films he puts out.
And hopefully conclude this spate of World War II films that we've been talking about.
That's right, because now we've got Triumph of the Heart and A Hidden Life, 2 similar kinds of World War II.
Yes,
World War II in the background,
totally.
So... But, I'll see you in a couple weeks. Thanks, everybody, for listening. And go to catholicculture.org/newsletter, please, and sign up for our email newsletters and see everything else we've got going on. Speaking of war, James just did a reading on Catholic Culture audiobooks of a tasty little essay called War and Murder by the great Catholic philosopher Elizabeth Anscombe, 20th century philosopher, famous for trouncing C.S. Lewis in a public theological debate, and he said he would never do a public theological debate again after that. I don't even remember what it was about, but he sort of admitted his defeat. Anyway, it's a really great little examination of the Catholic view on justified killing by the state, and also the limits to that. So it's quite interesting. All right, well, everybody, thanks for listening. God bless you all, and we will see you in a couple weeks, hopefully.
Criteria is a production of CatholicCulture.org. Check out our other podcasts, including Way of the Fathers, an early church history podcast hosted by Jim Papandrea, Catholic Culture audiobooks bringing to life classic Catholic writings, and the Catholic Culture Podcast, an interview show exploring Catholic arts, culture, and issues. You'll find all of this, as well as Catholic news, commentary, liturgical resources, and much more at CatholicCulture.org.